welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
It's the Skeptic Zone for the 18th of June 2011. Episode number 139. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Today's episode can only be described as mixed. Very mixed. It's like a mishmash of lots of different ideas all cobbled together. We're going to start off with Dr. Rachie Reports and a lecture she recorded by Barry Marshall all about ulcers. Yes, ulcers. Really worth listening to. Following that, we have Phil Cam, who gave a talk at Sydney Skeptics in the Pub about scripture and ethics classes in state schools. Now, for many years when I was going to school, once a week for about an hour or half an hour, I had what they called scripture at the time, where a religious representative would come in and, well, basically talk to us about religion. In my case, most of the time it was my own father, who happened to be the local minister. Anyway, that talk by Phil Cam coming up soon. And after that, we have a clip from the 60 Minutes program here in Australia, who ran a story critical, more than critical, about the anti-vaccination movement. The audio from this is just incredible. Hear Vera Scheibner and Bronwyn Hancock, two staunch anti-vaxxers, basically laying their cards on the table. Wait till you hear this audio. And to wind up the show, we're going to have a complete change, a completely different mindset. Maynard's going to speak to Bill Daily. Bill Daily? Bill Daily, you ask, who's Bill Daily? Bill Daily, better known as Major Roger Healey from I Dream of Jeannie. Yes, I know it's left field. It's a great interview, just something a little light-hearted, and that's followed by something even more light-hearted where Maynard talks about Global Wind Day. Something at the end of the show just to have a laugh. Well, I'm going to have a laugh. I'm going to race downstairs, grab another root beer, have a laugh, and we'll let you listen to The Skeptic Zone.
Now it's time for Dr. Rachie Reports with Dr. Rachel Dunlop.
Hello listeners and welcome to Dr. Rachie Reports. Well, this week I present for you part of a lecture given by Dr. Barry Marshall. Now, many of you may know this name. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, along with Dr. Robin Warren, in 2005 for his discovery that the bacterium Helicobacter pylori is the cause of most peptic ulcers. Now, this finding reversed decades of medical doctrine, which stated that ulcers were caused by stress, spicy foods, or too much acid. Now, Barry Marshall is a native of Western Australia, and he received his degree in surgery and medicine in 1975 from the University of Western Australia. He currently holds a position of Professor of Clinical Microbiology at the same university. Now, along with the Nobel Prize in 2005, Barry is a highly decorated physician who was also appointed a Companion of the Order of Australia in 2007, has been awarded an Honorary Doctor of Science from the University of Oxford in 2009, along with many and varied other awards. The lecture you'll hear today is part of a talk that Barry gave at the dinner for the Australian Science and Medical Research Week celebrations held here in Sydney in early June. Now, I apologise for some clinking cutlery and food noises at the beginning of this talk, but it only lasts for a short time and I urge you to persist because the content is really, really fascinating. You'll also hear in this lecture Barry refer to a cartoon which depicts him drinking a flask full of green muck containing Helicobacter pylori in an effort to prove that it actually causes stomach ulcers. If you'd like to see the entire cartoon, there's a link to the PDF in our newsletter for this week, and you can find a link to the newsletter on www.skepticzone.tv. And if you're on Twitter, you can follow Barry at BARJAMMAR or Barjammer. I hope you enjoyed this lecture as much as I did, and until next time, this has been Dr. Rachie Reports.
So we can start off by looking at Alfred Nobel's lessons from his own biography, in that he was unwell all his life. You know, he discovered he made nitroglycerin. He used to ship it all around the world, including to Australia. It was very dangerous. So he then put his head down for a few years, and he came up with the safe kind of nitroglycerin, which was dynamite. You mix it with clay and fuel oil or something, and then you have like plasticine, but it doesn't go off all the time. And he invented blasting caps and safety fuse. So with that combination, which he patented, and then had the Nobel Dynamite Company, I think it still exists to this day, and they supply dynamite all around the world. But he was a big tycoon, but he really had no pleasure out of his rich, opulent lifestyle, because he could never enjoy a meal. He always had indigestion and stomach pain all the time. And he used to go after these mysterious water treatments in Poland and drink radioactive water and all that kind of stuff. But nothing anybody did could make any difference to him in those days. So he finally passed away. Well, actually, he died from, he had a myocardial infarction, angina, and a stroke. And that's actually what used to happen to people with ulcers, because they would be put on these special diets called sippy diets, and they would be drinking cream and milk and buttery kind of food, and instead of having a steak, they'd have to have fish mornay or whatever, but all these creamy foods. And so they would get accelerated atherosclerosis, and people with ulcers used to die often not from their ulcer, but of atherosclerotic disease. So there was, in the literature, there was always this mysterious connection. So here's his biography, and it said that he always complained of indigestion, headaches, and occasional spells of depression, and he was overworked or under serious mental stress. And so this is a strategy doctors have had for hundreds of years. When you go to the doctor and you can't figure out what's wrong with you, he doesn't tell you that. He's a bit dishonest. He says, I think you're under serious mental stress, and that is the cause of your illness. So that then absolves him from having to make a proper diagnosis and puts the onus of the treatment and the cure of the condition on you, and you can't possibly get rid of the stress in your life. We all have it. It's just a natural thing. But now it's the problem, the reason he cannot fix your ulcer or whatever it is, irritable bowel would be a good one I see in gastroenterology clinics, is because you're under too much stress. And obviously I can't fix that. I'm just a doctor, and it's your fault and your problem. So the classic quintessential stress disease, which I loved to bring down, was actually peptic ulcer. It used to run in families. They did have this ulcer personality if you had ulcers, but that was because the main tranquilizer, food, never used to work very well if you had an ulcer, and so you would get this stressed, hyperactive personality, type A personality, I guess. It would run in families, worse with smoking. It would happen in the spring during the exam time. Now, why was that? Was it stress? Well, when I was under stress during the exam time, I used to miss meals. I would stay at the dorm rooms rather than at home. I'd be drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes all night and all that kind of stuff. So I could see if I had a tendency to an ulcer, I would develop it during exam time when I was in college. And so these things seem to fit in with stress. So now we know that stress didn't cause ulcers, but it was very difficult to convince anybody that stress did not cause ulcers, it was just these bacteria. So in retrospect, you couldn't, in 1890 you couldn't do an endoscopy, so the only way you could actually diagnose ulcers was at post-mortem. So poor old Alfred Nobel, he didn't even have a post-mortem, I don't think, so that didn't really happen. And so in the 21st century, stress is still a great excuse for idiopathic conditions. And I say to young people, if you're doing any research, if you ever go to a doctor and he says it's caused by stress, you're thinking in the back of your head, if I find out the real cause, there's a Nobel Prize in that. So this is why there's still a few Nobel Prizes out there in clinical medicine. And why is it difficult to have new discoveries and new medical discoveries particularly accepted? And the man who figured that out is Dan Boorstin, who was the librarian for the US Congress, and he said the greatest obstacle to knowledge, it's not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. So if everybody thinks they already know the answer, they're not looking for another answer. and they're not receptive to the innovation that you're producing. You're saying you're creating an invention without a use or without any need to have it. And so everyone's there, well, we've got Tagamet acid blockers. We know stress causes ulcers, too much acid. We don't need another cause, which is these bacteria, which must be such the fine print. And I'm saying, no, 95% of ulcers are these new bacterial ones. They say, get out of it. So here's Warren's original observation, the bacteria sticking all over the cells of the stomach, and there's the little black Helicobacter there. So you can see, if you're a microbiologist, you can see straight away, that's a pure culture of bacteria. They're not washed down there through your mouth. And this is what ulcers look like. This is a duodenal ulcer. There's a duodenal ulcer there, a bleeding, potentially fatal ulcer. And here's a gastric ulcer in the stomach, which could perforate through, give you peritonitis. So Warren and I, we started to find out who had these bacteria. We looked at 100 people who were coming to have the scope down for various conditions. In those days, we always used to have 100 people in our clinical research because we didn't have a computer, but if we had 100 in the study, we could easily say, 13%, 58%. So it was very easy to get the tables correct. So 58% had the bacteria, but if you had a duodenal ulcer, 13 out of 13 or 100%, or a gastric ulcer, 77%. So that was significantly different. And so we had an association between bacteria and ulcers, but a very strong association. The only way you get 100% in any medical experiment is if you faked your results. As far as I was concerned, 100% in any kind of data is rubbish. And so we set out to find out what was going on, figure out why these bacteria could survive in acid, etc. And we tried to publish it. So the question would be, though, on one side you've got these companies making $3 billion a year, global companies, millions of people taking their medication, stress-caused ulcers. And on the other side, you've got two guys in Western Australia publishing their first paper in The Lancet on the basis of 13 patients. Would the world accept a new cause for ulcers? And so the answer is no way. But in my naivety, I spoke to Warren at dinner one night, and we reckoned we were going to win the Nobel Prize in about 1986. We were not expecting a 20-year wait. So there we are. But we were pretty confident because we found that other people had discovered stomach bacteria before. And the famous one is this guy, Bizzozero, an anatomist. And he actually studied that he figured out that red cells actually had nucleated precursors in the bone marrow. So people used to say, you don't need a nucleus to have a dividing cell. Look at all the red cells. And he said, oh no, they have nucleated precursors in the marrow. So he was already famous. But the other thing, he said, acid-tolerant spirochetes live in the dog's stomach. So even 100 years before we came on the scene, it was in the literature that bacteria could live in the stomach of animals like cats and dogs. And Bizzozero had shown that. You can see the spirochetes there inside the parietal cells. Anyway, so we were fairly confident. We submitted our paper to the Australian meeting. And they wrote us a letter back saying, Dear Dr. Marshall, we regret your research paper was not accepted for presentation. We didn't even get a poster. The number of abstracts we received continues to increase, and for this meeting, 67 were submitted. We could only accept 56, so don't feel so bad. There were one or two that were worse than you. Of course, I was pretty depressed about that, but luckily, I did keep that rejection letter. So I say to young people in science, expect rejection and keep that rejection letter. You put it in a brown envelope, keep it in the bottom drawer of your bedroom drawer. You don't have to read it, it's too depressing, but keep it there because years later you'll be able to show a copy of that lecture in your speech if you succeed and you turn out to be right. Unable to find a suitable animal model, Marshall must experiment on himself. This is a quote from, guess what, a comic. And this is the comic put out by the Abbott Company when they discovered the antibiotic that kills Helicobacter, clarithromycin. They came to me and said, we want to make this comic, we're going to give it to every doctor in America so they know how to treat ulcers. There's 150,000 copies, some number like that anyway. And they sent the comic strip artist over to interview me, and he was the same guy who does the Incredible Hulk for Marvel Comics. And so I didn't actually have to bust my T-shirt open or anything, but I did have to drink a very green-looking brew of Helicobacter pylori. to prove that it could infect a healthy person and cause ulcers. And so, surprisingly, I did have an illness, and after 5 days I started vomiting, and that went on for a while. My wife's getting all worried about me, and finally we took a biopsy, and lo and behold, very heavy infection with Helicobacter. So I had proved that a normal person could catch these bacteria. You didn't have to have an ulcer first. So it was possible the bacteria came first and the ulcer came as a consequence, and one thing led to another. And that was published as a hypothesis in the Medical Journal of Australia. So the editor of the Medical Journal of Australia really stuck his neck out, because it was 10 years before people said it's true, and then went back to the Medical Journal of Australia and read it, and it was exactly right. And so that is the second most cited paper ever in the Medical Journal of Australia. The number one paper is actually the discovery of lithium for manic depression. So why did it take 23 years to win the Nobel Prize? And here's an interesting coincidence. 1882, Robert Koch, he cultured the TB bacilli. Nobody believed that they caused TB. They were too common. So he did this guinea pig experiment where guinea pigs got TB after being given the bacteria. And he called that Koch's postulates, the rules required to prove bacteria is harmful. You know about that. 1884, and then in 1905 he won the Nobel Prize for the infection TB. And in 1982, Warren and Marshall cultured bacteria for the first time, Helicobacter pylori, and it was 1984 was the year that I drank the bacteria, 100 years after Koch's postulates were described. And so we think the Karolinska committee giving the Nobel Prize, they wanted to wait until it was the 100th anniversary of Robert Koch before they gave us our Nobel. So it's not that it wasn't a good one, it's just they liked the history of it, and they liked to wait till 2005.
This is Desiree Schell, host of Skeptically Speaking. Check out our website at skepticallyspeaking.com and listen to us live on CJSR 88.5 FM in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I now return you to the Skeptic Zone.
Is Professor Philip Cam0, who is, I think I could say, single-handedly responsible for the ethics classes that are now being run in New South Wales schools at the time when kids would normally go to other religious education classes, so a lot of kids obviously still do, or those who prefer not, or whose parents prefer for them not to go to religious education classes, would spend the time at the library or doing all kinds of other boring things because they're not allowed to do anything productive otherwise. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Phil Cam. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaron, for that. I've been told I've got about 20 minutes to talk to you, and since I'm just recently back from Europe on a long flight with deep vein thrombosis and jabs all over the place and dosed up with stuff, you'll forgive me if I sort of wander in various ways, but I'll try to do my best to stay on topic. The topic for tonight actually is, that I've been asked to talk about, is the ethics trial that was held in New South Wales at this time last year, and as a result of which, with some changes in the Education Act and a lot of pushing and shoving politically now continuing on in our school system, at least on a fledgling basis. We'll see what happens as the new government sort of comes into its powers. But let me go back, first of all, and just fill you in a little bit on the background of this. I know it will be familiar to some people, but I'm sure it's not entirely familiar to others. Back in 2009, the St James Ethics Centre here in Sydney approached me about the possibility of constructing a program of ethics for children in schools as a complement, that's what they called it, to special religious education. They approached me because I'm from the University of New South Wales. I made a reputation over many years writing philosophy for children, because I come from a school of, actually these days, history and philosophy, but I'm a philosopher by profession. And I've done a lot of work in philosophy for children and written extensively for children and worked with teachers both here and abroad. So they thought I was a person to ask about this, and indeed I guess I was probably the person to ask. But it turned out that this project, as it transpired, had all sorts of problems and issues. And I want to talk about some of those problems and issues after I fill you in on the historical background. Anyway, so the St James Ethics Centre people came to speak to me. Simon Longstaff, the director of the centre, and a couple of his officers came to speak to me. And they had, in fact, approached previous administrations. Now, we're talking about the previous Labor government, but they had approached previous administrations, I think on 2 occasions, both of them Labor actually, and had been turned down when they proposed that there might be something for kids to do who don't go to scripture, as it's called, special religious education held once a week. Now, this scripture period, by the way, is something of that goes right back to the Education Act, so it's very, very old, and it's a provision for recognised religious groups or recognised churches to have a provision for children in school of up to 1 hour a week, every week of the school year. In fact, it's very rare. In fact, I'm not sure if it happens at all that any of the churches actually have this 1 hour period. It's usually more like half an hour or 40 minutes. But that's a regular feature, as most of us would know, in our school system, and the religious groups actually have that slot to themselves. Children who don't go to scripture, well, they have to be catered for, and it's usually a holding operation, because there has been a long-standing, I don't know how far back it goes, but there's been a very long-standing policy of the Education Department, the Department of Education and Training as it is these days, that students are not to be offered anything or any instruction that is of educational value in that period. So the kids who don't go to SRE can get on with reading or maybe watch a DVD for the umpteenth time or whatever it is, but they must not be given anything of instructional value. And as if it were necessary to add to that, it explicitly says in the departmental policy that they're not to be given ethics. There are other things they're not to be given, but they're not to be given anything, but they're especially not to be given ethics. So that looked like something of a barrier to the proposal that the St James Ethics Centre had in mind, and it's not surprising, I suppose, in the light of that, that they had been turned down on 2 previous occasions. So their request to me, or their coming to see me, first of all, was really about 2 things. One was, what would such a program of ethics for kids look like in your view? How would you go about constructing, or what would it look like? What kind of educational outcomes would you do? How would it be taught? What would the lessons look like? Practical things like that. But also, how do you think you're involved in education in various ways, how do you think we should go about actually getting our foot in the door? And that second question actually is the one to ask first, because if you don't find out how to address that question properly, there's no point in constructing all the lessons and worrying about the pedagogy and how you train teachers and so forth. And I said, well, usually the way these things are done in education is actually through a pilot. You have a pilot. I mean, it's going to be something very limited. You just have a collection of schools, you select them appropriately, maybe you run the thing for a term, so you've got a smaller commitment, and it's less threatening to the system because it's only initially temporary, it's of limited extent, only a few schools are involved, it's going to be subject to test and scrutiny, which is important, of course. So you're not just coming and saying, just open up your doors, let's open up the floodgates and have something else. You're saying, let's take a disciplined approach, let's devise something specially for this trial, and let's test it out. The government, as it turned out, although it was rather weak-kneed, I think I should say that about this, and even the Minister Verity Firth, who in the end was willing to sanction this thing at the last 11th hour, about 2 minutes to midnight actually, they nevertheless actually gave the go-ahead for this to at least go to the construction stage. That construction stage involved, I was going to say vetting, advice from the Department of Education and Training, whose officers from the Board of Studies and the Curriculum Directorate went through the materials that I constructed with a fine-tooth comb. And they took out anything they thought might be in any way objectionable. Objectionable, you might ask, to whom? Well, basically to the religious authorities who were breathing down their necks. The church body, Icarias, which actually is a body, inter-church body, which has oversight of special religious education, was breathing down their neck. George Pell was breathing down their neck. Jensen was breathing down their neck. So we actually had some of the major religious authorities in town blowing hot on this issue. So nevertheless, these materials were constructed, and I constructed the pedagogy for them. And we were told, by the way, just one other little detail, that no teacher was allowed to teach this, which looks a bit of a problem if you're going to implement something in the classroom, but it turned out it had to be parents. It couldn't be teachers. It couldn't be anyone in the employ of the Department of Education and Training, at least not in employment at that time. You know, if they were part-time, they could perhaps do it or something. But so it had to be parents. So we had to take people who are untrained as teachers and train them up. I had 2 days in which to do this. This is quite a feat. You take people who have no background in education, many well-meaning parents, often, you know, intelligent, professional people, but they had to be trained up to do their shtick in the classroom in 2 days with a little bit of background support while they were doing it. Not much, a little bit. Anyway, so that was the way that things went. And as you will know, all of you will know, I suppose, most of you will know, certainly that trial went ahead. It was evaluated independently by the Education Department, by getting an expert from South Australia and a team of people from there, UniSA, to actually come over and have a look at it. And they looked at it in great deal of detail and wrote a lengthy report, which is available on the department's website. If you're interested in it, you can actually have a look at it there. And basically, the pilot was given the big tick, thumbs up, and that meant that the department was happy with it, and the minister was in a bit of a tight corner, veritable rock and a hard place. But in the end, as I say, as you well know, she eventually gave approval. Now, that's just a bit of a quick thumbnail sketch of background for you. The things I want, that's not what I really want to talk about. There are other issues I want to talk about. There are a couple of them. Let me just raise them for you. And I'll just raise two, I think. The second one I'm going to raise, I think, is actually the more important and probably more of interest to most of you. But the first one, it seems to me, is also of some import. What would be the most important thing to motivate this special intervention? In other words, here you've got a situation where you've got the majority of kids in most schools, but the minority in some, going to special religious education once a week in that allotted time. Half an hour, 40 minutes, as I said, for the most part. Where the other kids are to be given nothing. Now the question is that discriminatory? I mean, are the children who decide, or whose parents actually formally decide that they're not attending what's called scripture or SRE, are those parents and children being discriminated against in some important way? The argument from the St James Ethics Centre was that they were. In fact, the main line of argument that they ran in favour of this special intervention was that it was to combat this discrimination that was occurring in the schools. Now, that's a really, really important question. Is it discrimination? And is it significantly serious so that the long-standing provision that's been there for the churches, that is built into the Education Act, should be tampered with or overridden. You might see, by the way, that of course behind all the different arguments, mostly specious and often very, very bad arguments, by the way, that were mounted by religious authorities against the trial, behind them all was just, it seems to me, one worry. And the worry's obvious. I mean, the arguments were just window dressing. The worry was, if you have a competitor in that slot, where you've had none previously, you might be losing bums on seats. And this is a major recruiting ground for churches. I mean, that seems to me just kind of obvious, and it was obvious enough whenever you kind of just look through what, or try to listen through what people were arguing to what they were really on about. So there you've got, as it were, there you have a provision that's been made for important and powerful groups in society, less powerful than they once were, but still quite powerful, as proved to be the case in the debates and the pressure brought on government. And then you have a group of people who are now decide to step outside of that and are getting no provision. Is that discriminatory? How do you deal with this issue? I mean, it's a simple way of saying, well, you might just say, well, it is discriminatory and it should be rectified. You know, that privilege should be done away with. But if you put yourself in the position of government, or if you put yourself in the position of the education department trying to manage this issue, you can't just simply make a quick decision like that. It takes a great deal of thinking through. The second thing, which is actually nearer to my heart and interested me a great deal more, was actually the form of instruction that's involved usually in what in my day, when I was a kid at school, used to be called religious instruction. And the word actually tells you something, but special religious education, as it's called these days here, there's a form of education involved in that, a model of education, and actually, and in fact, of ethical education in particular, which is at loggerheads with the kind of approach that I took, which comes out of philosophy. So let's have a quick look at these two different sorts of approaches, and I hope not to provide too much of a caricature of them. First of all, if you look at religious education, in special religious education, it isn't first and foremost, and certainly not only, ethical education. It's religious education. But religious education involves ethical education. Just take some common things that are commonly known. I just go to the Christian faiths, which are the major ones represented in our schools. If you talk about the Ten Commandments, they're a moral code. If you talk about the Golden Rule, of the New Testament, that's a moral precept or a moral rule. If you talk about moralizing, well, for example, Bible stories, say the Good Samaritan, is a moral tale, and when you tell such a tale, you're doing what's called moralising. So what I'm saying is that, in fact, when kids are engaged in special religious education, they're actually getting, by and by, moral education. It comes with religion, it comes with the field. The question is, however, not that they're getting that, but in what form is it being delivered? I mean, technically, we might think, what's the pedagogy, or what's the teaching mode that's involved in this? Well, usually, of course, it's instruction. Okay, so first of all, or it's simply moralising. So if you tell a moral story which has, as it were, a conclusion to be drawn, which is built into the story itself, then that's moralising. I'm quite a fan of Aesop's fables, but I never use them in my work in classrooms because they're actually morally directed. You're meant to draw the moral. The story's constructed so you draw the moral, and often in Aesop's fables, the moral is explicitly drawn at the end. Okay, so moralising and instruction in an ethical code is a certain way of trying to deliver ethical education. A completely different tradition in this, which is also venerable, is what I would call the philosophical tradition, and particularly the one famously in the history of Western philosophy associated with Socrates, the Socratic tradition. Now, the Socratic tradition is one of moral inquiry. Now, moral inquiry, whatever else it involves, isn't the teacher actually imparting a set of codes to the student or teaching them a moral lesson. It's bringing them to think about moral issues and moral problems and moral concepts and ideas, and to be able to evaluate them, to have clear notions of them, to be able to work with them, and to be able to judge them. And in simple ways, of course, with children, particularly, by the way, the children in the trial were years 5 and 6. Okay, so we're talking about 11 and 12-year-olds. We're not talking about them actually going into the annals of philosophy and trying to discover what Immanuel Kant said about the categorical imperative. But on the other hand, kids are trying to think about the importance of rules and where rules, for example, might come into conflict and what you do about that. Or about the difference between thinking about intentions and consequences. You know, how important these two different kinds of things are in different contexts of their lives, where they can appreciate the importance of these and the difficulties that they sometimes entail. And for them to do this together in order to think things through, for example, to explore their differences of opinion and understanding. That kind of approach is very, very different from the approach that says, well, we already have the moral knowledge and it's just a matter of imparting it to you, and we'll impart it to you by instruction or by moralising. Now, that's quick and rough, but it seemed to me quite evident in what I could see of what was going on in schools, in special religious education, and in the presumptions that were brought to the debate in the public arena, that there were two very, very different traditions here at loggerheads with one another. Okay, the tradition, if I can call it, of moral instruction, and the tradition of moral inquiry. And I think in the end this is a vitally important issue, because in fact it isn't just about special religious education, any compliment that might be put up against it for kids who don't go to Scripture. It actually has to do with how we work through problems and issues of a moral nature in society, and indeed more broadly, how we come to knowledge and understanding in general. And whether these things can be given to us by authority, and whether they are to be handed down on a platter, or whether we need to think these things through for ourselves, and whether we're going to be given the wherewithal to do so. So that's a really big educational and social issue, and it seems to me that in the discussions of the pilot that were had last year, particularly in the media, that issue was there, but it was never really clearly identified and articulated, and it needs to be. Okay, I've got about 2 minutes. So at the moment, just to go back to the history page, we have this kind of fledgling effort in schools. There is now a body called Primary Ethics, which has been set up to develop that program further. I extended the pilot program, which was written just for one term as a trial, to 2 terms, and that's currently being used in schools this year. I don't know really what's happening in the second half of the year, but the whole thing, it seems to me, is still open to further debate and political manoeuvring by the current government, and I think that there's probably room for a great deal more discussion to come on this matter. And insofar as that's the case, I would really like to see these issues two issues I've raised tonight actually have some prominence in the discussion, and particularly the second one, because it seems to me that issue is so really important to all of us about, as I would say in the large scheme of things, what is knowledge and how can we properly come by it? And if we don't address that issue in education, we really are lost. Thank you.
Are you sick of pseudoscience and the paranormal dominating popular media? Fed up with being surrounded by spiritualism and relentless religiousness? Yeah, me too. Well, you can do something about it. Help support the brand new Flim Flam comic, a weekly online comic strip that promotes critical thinking through quirky cartoons and hilarious jokes. The more skeptical media we share with the world, the better. It's non-for-profit, so we need your help. Go to flimflam.pozible.com.au. That's flimflam.pozible.com.au. You can contribute there. Let's spread critical thinking in every way we can.
Australian skeptics have always maintained that groups like the Australian Vaccination Network are not, in fact, pro-choice, but are dedicated to the anti-vaccination stand. While this is still the official position of the Australian Vaccination Network, other anti-vaccination campaigners aren't so shy. Vera Scheibner and Bronwyn Hancock were recently interviewed on the 60 Minutes program here in Australia. Vera Scheibner, by the way, won the 1997 Australian Skeptics Bent Spoon Award for the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudoscientific piffle in that year. In this interview, Vera Scheibner and Bronwyn Hancock leave nothing to the imagination. They make it clear beyond any doubt whatsoever that they are anti-vaccination, that vaccinations are only harmful and diseases are good. You don't have to take my word for it. Here is the audio.
Based on my extensive research of orthodox medical literature, I am totally against any vaccination.
Have you got anything good to say about vaccines?
No, because the immunity is achieved by going through the natural infectious diseases of childhood, such as measles, whooping cough, mumps, rubella.
So vaccines are dangerous and diseases are good?
Exactly.
You write here that the body only catches a disease if it needs to. So all those polio and measles epidemics, Bronwyn, the kids, their bodies wanted to catch those diseases, did they?
There are benefits of diseases. Now, I say that with qualification because obviously diseases have to be well managed, and going through a disease is like us getting exercise. This is one of the reasons why it's good to get rubella as soon as possible so that you have immunity to it.
But what about the risk of rubella to pregnant women who can have babies suffering terrible birth defects?
Don't answer things that you don't know enough about, okay? Just don't answer them. You were drowning. So let's call spade a spade. I see. Yeah. She was drowning, yeah.
Why would she be drowning?
Because she hasn't got the extent of knowledge that I have.
If she hasn't got the extensive knowledge, why on earth is she writing these articles on the website?
Maybe you have a point there. Yes, that's right. Maybe you have a point there, okay?
So just for clarity, you're not a medical doctor?
I'm not a medical doctor, no. But I am a doctor of natural sciences.
Am I right in thinking that, in fact, your expertise is in studying microfossils, little fossils?
My expertise is in many areas. One of them was microscopic fossils.
But actually, just for the record, you have no formal medical training.
I wouldn't say that, because I did a course of nursing when I was young.
But do you believe you know more than most doctors?
Yes, I believe I know more than most doctors. Vaccination of any kind causes autism.
So only children who are vaccinated get autism?
That's right, yes.
That's a heck of a story.
It is a heck of a story, yes. And how do you know they died from whooping cough?
These children went to hospital and the doctors there diagnosed them with whooping cough. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
But if the child was given hepatitis B at birth, it certainly suppressed its immune system and made it very susceptible to catching whooping cough from people around.
They're dead because their parents immunised them at birth against hepatitis B.
That's right, absolutely. Because vaccines are any vaccines are the single biggest cause of infant death. Those mothers have no knowledge to judge the case. They only listen to what doctors tell them. And of course, the doctors are only too happy to start blaming the disease instead of their vaccines.
can I put it to you both that maybe not from malicious intent, that the two of you are involved in a conspiracy to cover up the plain fact that infants die an agonising death from whooping cough?
Absolutely not. And I am walking out of this because this is a farce. But how about you put me in touch with those parents? I will ask them relevant questions to establish the whole medical history of these children, and then we shall see what they really died of. And I don't accept any accusations from you or anybody else about me doing something wrong, because I'm not doing anything wrong.
If I was to say anything good about Vera Scheibner and Bronwyn Hancock is, well, at least they are honest about it. At least they have laid their cards on the table to let us know, unlike other groups who pretend that they are pro-choice. Well done, 60 Minutes, for giving these people enough rope to hang themselves.
Hey guys, this is Jay from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And whoa, hold on, whoa! Everybody knows I'm the only reason to listen to the freaking show, right? I mean, if it was up to me, the show would start with this. Yeah, boy! Well, Rebecca would hate that probably, but I mean, I'd rock that. Listen to our show and you can learn about cool stuff like a technological singularity, which is someday when technology progresses so fast that it would make the Industrial Revolution look like a kid's science project. Anyway, come check us out at www.theskepticsguide.org and get your science on!
Ladies and gentlemen, TV fans the world over, I have on the phone a man who's going to be in Australia for Supernova in June at the Dome in Sydney, Mr. Bill Daily, or as I like to refer to him, and many people do refer to him as, that would be Major Roger Healy. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was a nice interview. I like that. Thank you.
Oh, look, and of course, you haven't just done that throughout your life. I'd like to ask you a lot of questions like, how you were in Korea fighting in an artillery unit in your youth, and then you got into the entertainment unit. That sounds like a great rort. How did you do that, Bill?
Boy, I do remember way back, that was 1950. I worked at the best hospital. It's okay because I was in the war during the 50s. The funny thing is I was a pretty good jazz musician, and then I was in the Army, and they were going to send me over to Japan, and I went to special service school, and I figured I'll be in Japan. They needed 20,000 guys in artillery, and they sent me over to Korean artillery. I said, oh, my God, what is this? And I didn't know what I was doing, but Dick Cantino, before your time, was a famous accordion player. He came through town. I sat in with him, and he took me back to Seoul, got in the truck, and went closer to the lines that I've ever been there. We entertained. The whole band was blown up. But it was a great 2 years of my life. The best 2 years ever of my life.
Is it strange that where you'll be travelling throughout your life and someone will recognise you in a really weird, out-of-the-way place and you just got no idea how they know you?
But I love it. I love it. No, I mean, here, everywhere. I mean, I've been nice, but, I mean, the people tell you, and I'll be like 84 and a half an hour, to have people come up and tell you that you're great. I mean, it just, all these autograph things that we go to, it's just unbelievable. And I'm going over there, and I'm dying to get that. I can't wait to go to Australia. I mean, oh, man, this is the most exciting time of mine. I really mean it.
And now, Larry Hagman and Barbara Eden coming with you?
Yeah. She wrote a book. I don't know if she had a few things about Larry telling about his early life. I think he might have been upset because she said that he was quite upset about that. But he, at the beginning, he might have a few problems. Without Larry, there wouldn't have been a show because he was the writer, the creator, director, and he had this energy. The guy was just absolutely brilliant. He was just, thank God for him.
As a kid growing up, there was Tony Nelson, that was Larry Hagman. He had the gene, he had the problems, he had things going on all the time. But Roger, who was an army major by the uniform, would turn up in the fantastic...
No one knows that, by the way.
Look, that's the thing. And although they didn't actually have army majors in the NASA program till the early 70s, but we don't care about that, Bill. It's fiction. It's great. And you would turn up in your convertible. You'd have a beautiful blonde with you. You'd have a cocktail in one hand because apparently you could drink and drive at that time in California. And smoke. That's right. People would smoke on Jeannie. And you'd turn up and you'd be going off to some party and Tony could never go because there was some accident. He was dressed as a Kalahari bushman or something and he couldn't go. And you went off and had the great life. And you were the guy I liked in that show because you were always having a good time.
Well, that was really me. See, I thought we were doing a road picture, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. I was doing Bob Hope. In fact, one of the greatest moments of my life when I was writing for Steve Allen, he would all have these big-time comedians at his party. And Bob Hope walked in and looked at me and said, "Are you doing me?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, my God." And I was doing Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, so that's it.
There's one question about the I Dream of Jeannie set. Now, I've got a photo of the inside of Barbara Eden's bottle there, the set that was the inside of her Jeannie bottle, and I've looked at it, and it looked like it might not have smelt that great. What did the inside of Barbara Eden's Jeannie bottle smell like on the set?
Well, I always tell her to light a match.
Because it looked a bit mouldy. It looked like where Adam West and Robin used to go when they went down the bat pole. It looked like an area that didn't get swept out a lot, you know.
That's funny, man.
and look, you were.
You're very bright, and you've done your homework.
Well,
it's amazing. It's sensational.
And look, like Larry Hagman, you're a damn good-looking guy at the time. Did you ever do any modelling or stuff? I mean, you did a stand-up and the comedy, but you're a good-looking guy. You and Larry Hagman could have done modelling work as well.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, Larry was I don't know if we could have done modeling. I never thought of myself as that. But that's in high school, my hair was voted one most likely to recede. We used to pencil our hair, and it'd take 9 hours, Larry and I, to put there. I still have one hair left somehow. I'm doing a show called My Three Hairs.
Hey, and where's your book, Bill? Where's your book?
Well, I would never do Barbara's writing one. And I was talking to my son. He's doing a film in town. It's great. I mean, it's so great. He's going to be with me here in Albuquerque. But if you can't, I would never hurt anybody. And if you can't do it like Barbara, I don't know, she's coming up putting in Larry all these things, and she's going to work with him. And all these things I would never, ever think. Man, I got some stories that are just unbelievable, but I wouldn't do it. And then my kids would read it. I mean, how would that happen?
Well, look, I'm going to catch up with you at Supernova, definitely. We're going to have a bit more of an intense chat there when you're in Sydney at the Dome. I'll be looking forward to that. But what do you think was the strangest episode of I Dream of Jeannie that you did? Because there was some unusual slapstick, particularly in the last season, there was some really wacky stuff going on. Is there one where you were doing it and you thought, wow, this is really odd?
Well, the thing is, I never done anything before. But what I liked when I didn't know that there was a genie, and my favorite scenes ever were on the first show, we're on the boat, and she disappeared, and they think he killed her. And he says to me, "I want you to go home, and I want you to talk to the wall." And he said, what do you want me to say? Well, tell the wall that I love her. Now that's it. And then we're in the heart, and I'm doing this thing, and Dr. Beller's in the back, and I'm talking to the wall. And that was great comedy time for me because I didn't know there was a genie, and that was my favorite offer. That was the first one.
Well, in fact,
Newhart writing was just beyond brilliant.
And there was
that was, those guys did, they did Taxi, they did Cheers, they did, that writing was brilliant. And Suzanne Pleshette, come on, give me a break.
And there was some episodes of Jeannie where you actually got control of Jeannie for that episode. You became her master, and we saw a very dark side of Roger Healy. He suddenly became a very greedy, egomaniac guy who wanted to take over the world.
Well, I was playing myself. Actually, I was playing with myself at the time. So that's it.
Bill Daily, I look forward to seeing you.
I love talking, man. You've done your homework.
Look. I'm going to bring photos, books, and things for you to sign, and we're going to chat till your ears bleed at Supernova, Bill. I look forward to seeing you then.
I love talking, Mater.
Hey, have you still got that convertible from the '60s? Still got that great '60s convertible?
Oh, that was a 9. I sold it for $400,000. It was a Richard Shelby. I paid $404,000. Paid it for it. Oh no, not that. No, that to get 1 mile out per gallon. Okay, I just want to say great talking to you, and I just can't wait to see you guys on it. Can't wait to be in Australia. I'm so excited. I'm just bubbling over here.
Great. Look, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you there, Bill. And great to talk to you.
Great, thanks. Good interview.
Bye-bye.
AstronomyCast takes a facts-based journey through the cosmos as it offers listeners weekly discussions on astronomical topics ranging from planets to cosmology. Hosted by Fraser Cain of Universe Today and myself, Dr. Pamela Gay of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, this show brings the questions of an avid astronomy lover directly to an astronomer. Together, Fraser and I explore what is known and being discovered about the universe around us. Join us each week as we take a facts-based journey through the cosmos at astronomycast.com.
How do you feel about global wind on this day?
I feel very fond of Global Wind Day. It's an important part of our culture, and I'm glad that it's getting the recognition it deserves.
And what did you do to mark this day last year and this year? You had some sort of party planned?
A kite party, actually.
Would you be the kind of person who would put a wind power thingo in their backyard?
No. I don't care about the environment that much.
Just nice to have a day where you can just talk about wind without fear or favour.
Yeah, just a day, though. Don't go too over the top.
No, well, you wouldn't want to go and make it a whole week. That would just be ridiculous.
Yeah, it would. It'd get a little tiresome.
How about that ash cloud?
Global Wind Day.
I've got some of that here. I'm looking at some tubbed shrubs to 3 metres bending wildly in my direction.
How do you normally commemorate International Global Wind Day?
Sort of balling my body up on the floor with both clenched fists above the base of my skull.
In a fetal position?
Sort of, yeah. And if I can crawl underneath a small table as well, that'd be good too. Kind of duck and cover.
So this is like cyclone practice?
You bet. I like to get a small supply of, say, crumpets and crackers around me as well. Possibly some tomatoes and a paring knife.
You must really look forward to the 15th of June every year.
Yes, I sure do. I sure do.
And, of course, when it comes to Global Wind Day, there's only one man who would want to be represented at the front of that particular crowd with his sandwich board saying, "Give me more wind." That'd be Tim Ferguson.
More wind to the sails. Already I'm 2 sheets to the wind. I want to get 3 sheets up there and Russell Crowe on the lookout. Maynard, for years I was joining marches saying, "Stop the wind. No more wind, ban the wind." But these days I've changed. I've become, a total greenie, and I think more wind faster and wetter than ever before is what we need.
How does your normal routine deviate for Global Wind Day?
Well, of course, you have to put on a flowery, flimsy dress. And
a muumuu.
Oh, yeah, a muumuu, that's good. And you have to wander through parks singing songs like La 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 and Hey Nonny Nonny Nonny.
Are you the kind of person that might just build some sort of wind generation device in your backyard merely for the fact that you can mock your neighbours that have only got solar?
Well, I think it's only fair to mock my neighbours who only have solar because, weren't they standing outside and feeling the wind? Not only will I have a big fan making lots of noise in the back of my wind and killing wedge-tailed eagles, but I will also have a wind sock. And then I think all Australians can finally say, we are Australia. We blow it out.
Jeg er Marit. Og jeg er Kristin. Og vi vil tipse deg som norsk lytter av Skeptic Zone om skeptikermiljøet i Norge. Det finnes norske blogger og pubtreff og podcast, og foreningen Skepsis driver med slikt som disse du hører på nå. Sentralt er skepsis.no, og her publiseres det dyptgående artikler, en kalender over aktiviteter og lenker til nyttige ressurser. Skepsis-bloggen oppdateres jevnlig, og det diskuteres heftig på forumet. Så stikk innom og delta du også. Skepsis.no.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. What a strange show that was. What a mixed bag of different things. Now, as it happens, Maynard and I went to the Supernova Science Fiction Festival here in Sydney just today. And next week we're going to play some clips from our little adventure out there. We even bumped into some Skeptic Zone fans. All good fun. But for now, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.